Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome out to tonight's training webinar. This is our weekly webinar on all things tax lien or tax deed related. We do this every Wednesday night here at the same time. I don't know if we've got anybody here for the first time. I think I've got Steve with me this week too.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Well, excellent. Excellent. Well, if this is your first time here, we're just kind of assuming that you generally know who we are. You've been through all of the basic stuff before. But if we do have anybody that's here for the first time, certainly let us know. We enjoy talking to members here for the first time. But I think for the most part, people have been to many webinars before. So what are we talking about tonight? The topic that we wanted to focus on is really all about preparing for tax sales. We wanted to get into some of the different details in the preparation process and things that you do. I think oftentimes we tend to take things for granted sometimes because we've been doing them for a while, or sometimes we need to slow down and explain things well, for instance, like preparing for tax sales, because there's a lot that goes into it outside of just trying to research property.
Yeah, I mean, really, besides due diligence and property evaluation, really how to prepare for the auction is probably one of the questions that we get asked the most, or what do I need to do, what are the steps? And so hopefully tonight we'll be able to go over some of those things and answer any questions you guys have.
Oh, excellent. It is Randy, it's great to have you here tonight. See, there's one of the new members that we have, and I'm thinking that even our new members kind of have an idea of who we are. It's kind of how you probably came in contact with us here originally. It's probably through videos and things like that. We also just wanted to say thank you to some of our members here. We've got Matthew Kroll here that left. Different members have left 5-star reviews here for us on Facebook. Robert Pullaby and also Dex Allison has left us with 5-star reviews, and we just wanted to say thank you for that. That means the world to us, and I think we've put together something to benefit people. Is it?
Yeah. What we're going to do for anyone that goes to Facebook and leaves us a 5-star review and a testimonial, we're going to go ahead and do a strategy call with you. So we'll give you a call. We'll spend a little while with you and kind of find out what you're going and put together a quick investor profile type strategy for you to get started with, kind of point you in the right direction. So, this kind of stuff only helps us. As you guys know, some of our history, me and Shade have been really working with the seminar companies for quite a few years, and so we're doing this on our own, and so these things make a big difference on Facebook and help promote our company. So we definitely really appreciate that.
Yeah, we really do. And yeah, we like the chance to talk with you as well, and do those short conversations where we can kind of go over what you want to accomplish and see if we can get you pointed in, or make sure, I guess, you're pointing in the right direction, or give you ideas. Really, we're happy to do anything we can to help you progress. Now, some of the topics or announcements we wanted to cover before we get into the training. First, important notice, we have one opening left for the 3-day event in October again, that's the 6th through the 8th. Now, it makes a lot more sense to us if we can have the event filled rather than having seats empty. And so we definitely are motivated to fill that last seat. If anybody's interested in attending, or if they might be interested in attending, get in contact with us and let us see if there's anything we can do, because we definitely want to get the place filled up.
Yeah, and one thing as well is this is going to be a very, very small group. I mean, because of kind of the situation that happened with my brother and everything, we didn't quite have the chance and the time to be able to prepare for it as far as the time's concerned. So we decided to make this a very small event, which in our 20 years of investing, I've never been so excited about teaching an event and working with the students. And so we're only going to be working with, 5 students in this event. So if it's something you're interested, just let us know. We'll give you a call. we'll talk with you about it. If it's something that works out, great. If it's not, then we're going to point you in the right direction from there.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Hey, that sounds good too, Randy. We'll definitely look forward to talking with you here. Personal coaching. I think it was mentioned, I think I mentioned it last week, but we currently have personal coaching available. Basically, it's available until it's filled, and we have kind of the same philosophy with that. You know, we've done some coaching with the members in the past, but it was usually such a conflict with our time that you know, everybody would, you know, tell us that we shouldn't be doing that kind of a thing. But the reality was working with directly with our members is what we enjoyed the most. You know, that was actually where we got the most enjoyment out of it. But personal coaching is not really something that Steve and I have offered a lot to members, at least as far as us doing it personally. You know, we've had different coaching programs before, but this is a little bit different because what we're talking about here is just doing personal coaching with us, and that's a really small group of people as well that we do personal coaching with. So for anybody that's looking for more help or more of a personal touch, both of those things, the 3-day event and the personal coaching, are great ways to get additional help. And there's nothing wrong with getting additional help. In fact, can you just imagine if we could have got help in the first year or 2 years from somebody that could have actually told us what was going on and, you know, what we were doing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, you're talking about decades really worth of experience, and really through trial and error. Not only through our own investments, but through helping students and investors in situations, and just being involved with tax sale investing for so long. Really, you know, the chance to work one-on-one with just a handful of students. We're just going to take a couple of students each, but if that's something you're interested in, definitely contact us.
Yeah. Let's see. Other things we're going to talk about. We kind of briefly go into the 6 steps of investing, but it's not so much to cover the 6 steps of investing here as it is to just kind of show where we're starting out at, and to talk about preparing for the auction and some of the things that we do. And truthfully, it doesn't necessarily have to be an auction that you're preparing for, just because not all buying methods are going to require an auction. It could be over the counter, and you know, if that's the case, then you know, you don't have to worry about participating in an auction when you decide you want to buy something. It's just about making payment arrangements. But don't let that throw you off. We're basically trying to give you an idea of exactly where it's at. You'll see it here in a moment. We're also going to talk about creating and utilizing your property lists when you are preparing for auctions, and then some of the different questions that you need to answer through the due diligence process, or questions that you need to have in your head when you're performing due diligence. So we're going to just dive right into it here, and feel free to ask questions at any point. We love to get them, and it's nice with the way that WebEx is set up. You can ask questions, and we can see it and address it at any point. So I really love the question system they use. Okay. So, mention that we're just going to mention this for a minute because we're talking about preparing for the auction. And, you know, if we're looking at the overall steps in the process here, really the first 2 steps are about figuring out where and how it is, you know, that you're going to invest. And so there's different ways that people go about doing this, you know, in those first 2 steps, whether it be, well, I think generally people are either searching for opportunities or they're searching in a specific area. You know, they're either looking for the best opportunities and tend to gravitate towards that, or you know, they maybe are set on a certain area that they want to try to focus on. But that seems to be the most common ways that people decide where to start.
Yeah, definitely. And most of our members will go ahead and use the investor profile section within that area just to kind of narrow down the different types of investing, the different strategies, so that they can kind of pick a state to get started with.
Yeah, in fact, choosing an investor profile will do a lot to help you have a clear understanding of exactly what you're looking to accomplish and do. Because the reality is, and this is something that confused me for a long time, but tax liens and deeds are they're not a one-size-fits-all. They don't even all work the same, and So it's important to understand some of the differences there. But the steps that we're talking about right here are really similar for whichever method you happen to be using to buy, because you're essentially figuring out what your strategies or how you're planning on making the money and obtaining a list or settling on a sale. And that's really where we're starting at, is at that point after you have, let's say, set your mind on a certain sale, or once you're looking into a certain sale, you've got a list. That's the point that we're going to jump into right here. So, I think we can do additional trainings down the road or another time about some of the other topics, but let's dive into this. So, before we get into due diligence, there are some important questions that you need to ask yourself and answer, essentially, before you can move on to the next step. They're pretty simple, but the three questions are: first, what's your budget? Okay, so in other words, before you start doing all of this due diligence and research with all the properties on this list, the first question we're going to go through is, what's your budget? How much do you want to spend total at the auction? What is it you're working with there? The second question is, do you want raw land or do you want property with improvements? And if you've ever been on our webinars before, or if you've heard them before, you might know that we don't see raw land investments as a bad thing. Okay, there are lots of investors that seem to view it as a bad thing, but we actually love raw land. In some ways, we love it more than improvements. It certainly is less of a headache than improvements.
Yeah, and I would say that most of the investors that don't like land are investors that really are new investors, beginning investors. Mm-hmm. Because if you're working with a serious investor that's done a lot of real estate deals, they're not so concerned about what is the property. They're concerned about what is the profit. What is the profit margin. And so when we're looking at property, one thing we like about land is we don't have to worry about fixing the property up or termites or a new roof or any of those kind of things that may come involved with an improvement property. That doesn't mean that improvement properties are not great. In addition with that, a lot of times you're going to have more competition as well. So if you're looking to get the best possible price, don't overlook that raw land, the building lots, different things like that, because that may be one of the most profitable properties you could purchase on the list.
Yeah, in fact, I think that some of the best opportunities out there are with raw land. And here's the reason why. Obviously, nobody wants to lose money. Nobody wants to lose, their property to the government. And for the most part, it doesn't happen a lot with most normal properties. In other words, you don't normally see nice homes being lost to property foreclosure, to tax deed sales. In fact, it's pretty rare, to find nice properties. And the nicer they are, the more unlikely it is, that they are foreclosed on by the county because of delinquent property taxes. And so, what ends up happening with counties prior to tax sales is the nicest properties always end up redeeming the soonest. And also properties that have more than one owner. So let's say any property that has some type of a loan against it, if we're talking about anything with a mortgage or any other type of encumbrance, those properties also always end up redeeming, because not only do you have the primary owner who doesn't want to lose the property to foreclosure, but there are other parties that are involved. So before you could even foreclose on it, you would have to the county would notify those parties as well. And so what ends up happening is a lot of the nice properties with improvements end up getting redeemed, but raw land is much more likely to be owned outright. It's also more likely to be something that somebody might let go or lose because of delinquent property taxes. And we see it on a regular basis. In fact, if you're going through and looking at lists, the vast majority of what you're looking at are going to be pieces of raw land. And occasionally you'll also come across properties with improvements. Sometimes you can find a lot of them. Sometimes there are not as many. But the property with improvements, like Steve said, can be great, but there's also a lot of additional concerns that come up as soon as you add those improvements. You know, what's nice about raw land is you can invest in raw land from out of state. You know, in other words, you don't have to live in the state. You can be an out of state investor. In fact, you can invest in raw land online. You don't actually have to be there and lay eyes on the property when it comes to raw land, because you don't have to worry about anything really changing. You don't have to worry about you don't have all the same concerns that you have when there's a structure or some kind of an improvement there that you have to worry about with condition, and you know, that's where you've really got to lay eyes on a property. When it comes to most pieces of raw land, yeah, I'd say that the need to have physical eyes on the property there are not as important if we can get a pretty good picture of what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, land is land. There's not much that's going to go on with it. But when we're talking about, you know, structured properties, especially if you're investing out of state, if you're investing in some type of online auction, before you bid on that property, we always recommend to have a current photo taken of the property. So if that's you, if that's hiring somebody else, if that's putting in a Craigslist ad, those are all additional steps and things that you're going to need to go through to make sure it's a good investment. With land, it's just a little bit simpler, and it's also easy to turn around and sell as well, for the fact that it is land, that you're not going to have to, you know, go out there and show the property to people. People can drive by, they can see what it is, they can look online, see what it is, and essentially, you know, it's just a good, easy way to turn around and sell property.
Yeah, yeah, there are so many different advantages, I think, associated with raw land. You know, also raw land has less direct competition, and that's because lots of the people that that get into tax sales, their mentality about real estate is still the same mentality they had maybe before they started investing in tax liens or deeds, or before they started looking, meaning that their ideas of what a good investment property would be was somewhat limited. Okay, they have this idea of maybe what a good property would be, and oftentimes it has something to do with whether or not they would personally want to live there, or whether or not they think it's nice, when in reality none of that stuff really matters. Like Steve mentioned before, the only thing that really matters is that the numbers work. And with raw land, the numbers are always amazing. And it's because you don't have people bidding up the price and driving up the price, and the counties will generally offer it at a minimum bid amount, which is oftentimes 10% or less of what it's worth. And not only that, but they're over the counter too. Tons of land. Land is so common that you can get it over the counter, so you don't actually even have to participate in the auction if you'd prefer not to. You know, lots of advantages there, really.
Yes, especially if you're investing with outside your own area, or you know, or you're just getting started investing, you haven't done a lot of investing. You know, that may be a good way to get started, is to purchase a few building lots or some type of piece of raw land that you can turn around and sell a little bit easier. It's going to be easy. You can see here, you know, number 3 is the exit strategy, and that's something you're going to need to think about when purchasing that property, is how am I going to get rid of it? Am I going to sell or finance this piece of land, which is something you can do so you can bring residual income? Am I just going to turn around and sell it, you know, as a lump sum or a quick flip, just to try to get rid of it and get some profit? You know, there's lots of different things that you can do at that point, but it's going to make it a little bit easier to sell because you can go ahead and market it online. Yeah, in fact, there are so many things about it that would be beneficial or nice, making it easier to sell. Yeah, I decided to plug in some answers here so that we could kind of go through and role play with this. So we were to say, okay, if our budget was $5,000 and you know, we're interested in raw land, and our exit strategy would be to wholesale it or seller financing. Exit strategies tend to either fall under long-term or short-term, and under the long-term, we have strategies associated with, for instance, like rentals. If you were to rent something out or lease it out,
But that doesn't always work with things like, I mean, because not all property is going to be something like an apartment that you could rent or lease out. But that's where seller financing comes in, because it gives you that long-term option, that residual income option, and it would also increase the potential pool of buyers as well, because you're offering something that they may not be able to get anywhere else, and you're offering them the ability to buy the property easier than they would normally.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing that's nice about seller financing a piece of land versus seller financing a home is there's not going to be an eviction process. They quit paying you, essentially per the contract, after so many months, 2 months, 3 months, whatever that time frame is. They essentially lose their investment, and then you just go through the process again. So you're not going to have to go through, that eviction process like you would maybe if somebody was living in the property.
Another one of the benefits, another one of the benefits of doing this with raw land. I actually just lost what I was going to say. Sorry, we'll move forward. Never mind here. Okay, so essentially, we've got our answers here with these 3 questions. But the reason why these ones are important answers in the beginning is because what they're actually going to do is they're going to help us narrow our selection. They're going to make it easier for us as we first dig into a list. And that's because they're helping us to identify some broad qualifications for the properties that we're interested in. Okay, so if we know exactly where the budget's at, that's a no-brainer, because we can eliminate everything that kind of goes over our budget, which is going to be a good chunk of the stuff that's on the list. If we already know that we're interested in raw land, we can eliminate everything that's not raw land. And knowing that we're looking to wholesale this property or do some kind of seller financing, really what that tells us there is that it's really all about the price. It's really all about what we can buy it for and turn around and essentially sell it. So let's talk about exactly how we go about and start doing this. First off, when you are planning on attending an auction, when you start to perform due diligence or research, when you download a list, I guess one of the questions that we're wondering here is if you're working off of the list that you download from the county, or if you are essentially kind of creating your own list. I ask that because it can be a little bit confusing. You never get the same format, it seems like, twice. And so counties sometimes produce lists in PDF formats or in so many different formats. And I was wondering if, so far when people look at these things, if they've actually gone about creating a property list. And if not, it's probably a good idea that we covered this, because it definitely changes how you go about. I mean, it makes it so much easier when you attend the auction. It makes it easier to keep track of what you're interested in, what you're bidding. I mean, it's really about being organized and having a good system so that you can perform your due diligence. So really what we mean there is that you need a property list that you can create essentially from scratch, pretty much. You need a list of the properties that you're interested in, and you need to have that ability to edit, modify, add things to it. But essentially, once you have that list, well, there are a couple things we want to do here to make our job easier. First, we want to divide the properties that we see as being potential investments from those that we for sure want to ignore. Okay, and it's important. It's good to have a list of both. We've tried it before where we only have a list of, let's say, like the ones that we want, and not necessarily a list of all those that we don't want. But what ends up happening there is you're lost half the time in the sale because you don't have all the additional numbers that you need. You're really going to want to have listings of everything that they're selling at the auction so that you can follow along and keep track. So we're going to separate those first by the ones that we see as potentials and the ones that we don't. And once we have a list of potentials there, we want to arrange those according to, if we're attending an auction, according to the auction times. We want to get those in an order so that we're looking at those as they're being, basically in order of how they'll be sold. It's important to do that. It'll simplify things as well. But something else that's worth noting here is you want to create the list using software or the program that you are familiar with and that you're comfortable with. I don't know that it has to be any one of these. I think you could probably use just about any of the programs out there, like Excel or Word or Docs or Sheets, as long as it's a program that will allow you to enter that information in.
When we're talking about tax sale list, it can definitely range. If you've got a list of 10 properties, it may not be that hard to go through and modify them. But if you have a list of 500 or 1,000 properties, well, then going through that list and knowing which properties you're going to, you're focusing on and having that additional information is going to be very helpful for you.
Yeah. In fact, remember here that your time is really what's going to be most valuable, and the last thing you want to do is get sucked into things that take up a lot of your time but don't really help you to see a lot of results. And so anything that's going to help you save time is a good idea. And whenever we're talking about when you're first getting started and trying to narrow your selection, like Steve mentioned with some of the bigger lists, really what you need the ability to do when we say narrow your selection is you need a way to zero in on potential investments without spending all the time for standard due diligence on each one. We're generally looking for things that are easier to identify and with properties. So why don't we take a look here? I've got a sheet that I created right here that's similar to stuff that we create sometimes. In fact, what we've actually started using that is really handy are like the Google Slides programs.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody here has uses it for anything else, but they've got the Google Sheets program, and they've got the Google Slides program, which are like online versions of Office, and both of them are really handy and nice for sharing between or being able to access online at any point, which is it's kind of handy. It's like you basically always have a server available to you. So
one thing that's nice about it too is if you've got different people looking at the same list. So if you have a partner or something like that, and you both have the same ability. So that's what's nice about these online lists for Meat and Shade is if we're investigating a particular county or researching a county for an upcoming sale, we can create that online doc, and it doesn't matter if we're at the office, if we're at the home, either one of us can go on that same doc and edit it or add information or whatever else.
Yeah, which is incredibly handy, and it really is handy when we're working with somebody else. If we're working with a member or with an investor or with somebody that's bringing capital to an arrangement, whatever it is, anytime we need to share that information, it's one of the handier, easier ways to do it. And so I would encourage you, if you've never used it before, to try using some of those programs. If you've never seen it, just go into Google and type in Docs, and you'll see some of the different programs. I think they got Docs, Sheets, and Slides. I think are their 3 online programs to handle all of that, and they're all really helpful for this kind of thing. So there are a couple of things that we do here with the list. You can see on the upper half, let's say we've got the properties that that I'm most interested in. I didn't take all the time to plug in the addresses here because I'm actually working on a form that you'll be able to use and reuse over and over again. But the idea behind this is pretty simple. It's to get the information out there in front of you in the easiest terms to see, and trying to minimize the amount of time that you spend doing it. And so a lot of these programs are are handy for doing that. We just want to make sure that we basically get all the relevant information up there. And then let me take a look here. In fact, so what we've got listed here, some of the main things that are important to us. In fact, what we end up talking about more than anything usually is the price. You know, the price of a property. In fact, the number one advantage that we have as tax sale investors is going to be price every time. That's the advantage that we have over other investors, over other buying methods or strategies with real estate. Nobody else can buy property as cheap as we can buy property through tax sales. You won't find it any, you won't find it cheaper anywhere else. And so the price that we pay is a real weapon for us, and it's probably one of our best weapons. But part of what we want to be able to see quickly is we want to know what the overall value is. We want to know bid to value ratio, whatever the starting is. Other things that are important too. Last week we were talking about how important that judicial foreclosure process is that properties go through when they're foreclosed on, and how that wipes out things like mortgages that would otherwise still be attached to properties. You know, that is really what makes tax deeds such a great investment. But at the same time, though, we also talk to people all the time, members that are really concerned about liens that might still exist against properties. And I think part of this, there's some valid concerns when it comes to certain types of liens, but I think that people have the wrong idea about it. People are worried. A lot of the people we talk to, I think, are worried that that there is something kind of like a mortgage that could be against a property, but you won't really find that. In fact, I don't know that we really, not very often, we ever dealt with tax deeds that had anything related to a mortgage. Nothing like that.
No, I mean, really, there's only a couple places in the country where you could even invest in a tax sale with a mortgage. One of them being New Mexico, and the other one being a certain type of sale within Pennsylvania called the upset sale. But the judicious sale, the respiratory sale, all of those are going to have all of those erased. So it's really something where the only type of other encumbrance that you're going to have is some type of governmental lien. Now, I would say that generally speaking, more often than not, you're never going to see something like an IRS lien. Maybe out of 500 properties, there's one. It's just not something that's incredibly common. Even with an IRS lien, you're not going to lose your money. So usually the only other kind of lien that you're going to see, or that you're ever going to really deal with, may be some type of local city lien, like Shade has listed here, a municipal grass lien, or a cut lien, or a mow-lawn lien. And even those generally are pretty rare. But if that's, those are really the only kind of things that would stick to a property.
Yeah, and as investors, the only thing that we're really concerned about is that we're not getting surprised by anything. And any of the municipal liens that might be against the property, most of these are not going to be big enough to suddenly make the investment not worth it. But you wouldn't want to buy it though and then not know about it. Realize you have to pay another whatever amount because it's a surprise. But that's what we're normally talking about. If there is some kind of a lien against the property, it's going to be something like a grass cutting lien or something along those lines. And those simply just don't go away because the county doesn't want to forgive it. I guess they don't have to because really I think at that point the money is owed to them and they can enforce it. They basically control the transfer of all ownership with properties in the county. So if you don't pay that municipal grass, lien, you're not transferring ownership.
Yeah, and really it's just because it is another governmental lien, and so they don't want to extinguish anything else. Kind of like a conflict of interest as well. You know, even if it was a city lien, if the city was, you know, if the county went ahead and erased that, the city could obviously be a problem with the city. And so, you know, usually you're going to see these on more of like abandoned homes. That's generally where you'll see a mow lien or something like that. But if, you know, it's something that we've talked about in past trainings on how to be able to research that. It's really just a matter of calling the city and checking. But, you know, as long as you're aware of it, it's usually not going to be something that you're going to come across. It's just something you're going to check while you're doing your research.
Yeah, I think Steve made a good point there too, in that it would be more likely to see something like a municipal lien with a property with improvements than so much with just different pieces of raw land. You know, we've looked at a lot of raw land in over-the-counter lists and through all the different tax sale lists, and it seems like it's fairly rare to find raw land with much in the lines any kind of trouble or problems with it, and it's usually because their ownership history was pretty simple anyway. It seems like most of the time we're dealing with land it's owned by one person or one party, sometimes for a long time, or it's passed around through a family, but they're not quite the same as something like a home that people may use as collateral or to secure different loans and things like that. It's less likely that people have done that with raw land. So I think it just overall they're just more simple to deal with. But why don't we talk for a second about part of what it is that drives or determines value, because these are some important things to also consider when you're going through a list of properties. These are things that will affect the overall value of the property. You know, these are things that that can either bring the value up on a property, or things that can bring the value down. You know, on a property. You know, we use the acronym STUD, which stands for Scarcity, Transferability, Utility, and Demand. I think it's a good acronym to remember because each one of those things are really crucial. I mean, you know, if any of those have issues, it can affect whether or not it'd be worth buying.
Yeah, each one of these is going to greatly affect, you know, the value of the property. When we're looking at scarcity, transferability, utility, demand, each one of those is going to have an effect on the value. We'll go through each one and kind of explain how that works.
So scarcity, as you know, I mean, I think everybody has understands the concept of supply and demand. Scarcity basically can work both ways, whether you have things that are too plentiful and, you know, there's saturated in the market, or whether you have something that is highly desirable and you know, not very common, which will make for a quick sale. The scarcity of the item is something that's important to look at. It's something that we look at whenever we're looking to buy a different property. We try to get an idea of how much property is available in an area, you know, before we buy there.
Yeah, definitely. You know, get an idea of the value of the lots and how many property are available. And really, one thing that's nice is that the real estate market is only going up. You know, to me, in looking at some of the other investment strategies out there, if we're talking about the stock market or any of these other type of investments, to me that's a very risky investment. But with real estate, we're seeing many areas of the country where the real estate prices are rising 5–10% a year. So even just sitting on a property, you essentially could be making a 10% or even higher return each year just in the appreciation, just as that property value goes up. And so, you know, I guess we'll maybe kind of think of that as I read an article this last week that was talking about how there's less property available in the country than in, say, 5 or 10 years ago, which means that those prices of the property are going up. So that's only a good thing for us. The great thing about tax sale investing is there's always going to be property, because there's always going to be people that don't pay their property taxes. So we're always going to have this influx of property to be able to purchase.
You know, something else that's worth noting is I think that the financial direction that the country has gone, or a lot of the people in the country, I think, have experienced over the last 10 or 20 years, is a bit of a departure from maybe what it was further back in history, because I think that people are getting poorer, and things like credit are becoming harder or more scarce, I guess you could say. And because of that, it opens up opportunities for things like seller financing, where there's already a limited amount of real estate out there, and of the stuff that is out there, people have to qualify, or if it requires different things. Well, being able to offer something like seller financing is such a powerful tool. When it comes to the current condition of the market, there's more and more people. It's a growing group of people that may not be able to get a house through traditional methods. But with seller financing, they would jump on that. And seller financing has a lot of other advantages to it. Like, for instance, seller financing also enables you to sell it for a higher price because, again, they're financing it. So, it's not a matter of how much capital this person can come up with all at once. So you can generally get a higher selling price, out of it. But also, we were mentioning, it doesn't have to be something like a property with improvements. It doesn't have to be a house. Somebody can do seller financing with something like a piece of raw land and pay on it over the course of 18 months or 2 years if you wanted, and have that work as well. But what's powerful about these strategies is that you're already able to buy tax sale properties for a really low price. So, compared to their value, you're able to pick it up for a fraction of that. And if you can essentially buy that property and get it to begin creating immediate income, you are just hitting a humongous home run, because you're making money in several different ways. First off, you're making, you bought it for a low price. You're making money monthly with it now, with the arrangement that you have. So you've got that regular money coming in every single month, and in addition to that,
another good point you brought up, Shane, was really the ability to increase the price through seller financing. So when we're usually looking at one of these building lots, if we're going to be selling it, we're going to sell it closer to wholesale value just to turn around and flip it. But if you're going to do seller financing, you can bring it up closer to market value. So maybe you still want to give the person a deal, but instead of selling it at wholesale value, you're going to sell it between wholesale value and market value. And so that's going to give you additional extra money, and it's also going to help you get more money out of the property. And one thing, right before we kind of had a situation a couple of months ago, we listed one of the properties with seller financing and ended up getting, 30 different requests on it. And so there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah, there's high demand for it.
And it might not be just because they don't have money. They could have money because they don't want necessarily to put out an additional debt on their credit. It could be because you're offering it with zero interest. I mean, that's something where people are going to jump on. If they could buy a property for, let's say it's a building lot that you're selling for 10 grand and maybe it's worth 20 or 30. At that point, let's say it's worth 20. At that point, you're giving them a deal, but they may be able to buy that property, with very little interest or less interest. And so a lot of times it makes more financial sense for somebody than just plopping down all the money and buying the property or trying to go get a loan on that property, especially something like a building lot, because something like a building lot or land, that may be something in the future for them. So they're looking at that as more of a future investment. Well, I'm not going to build a home right there, but I'd like to build a home in 5 years there. And so over that 5 years, they're going to be paying that down, and then once they're ready, they'll be able to build their home on the property once they own it.
Yeah, there really are some, I think, advantages to buying that way. There are a lot of people that would jump on an opportunity like that. I mean, part of the reason you do seller financing is because it opens you up to an entirely new block of potential buyers that wouldn't be interested in it otherwise. So I think it's really helpful. The other thing that we're just going to mention when you do something like seller financing is it's kind of like renting something out because you are making money on it. Basically, you could do, well, ultimately the person may want to buy it, but if they default, you're never at any risk because you never actually transferred ownership. So you're not actually losing anything, but you're basically able to make money on a monthly basis, plus the property's still appreciating in value every single year, and you're making money on it that way as well. You know, you own it outright, and it's going up in value by 5% or 10% a year. Plus, you're making X number of dollars every single month on it. You can see how it starts to add up, and it doesn't necessarily take a real expensive property to start doing all of that stuff. You can do all of this stuff with properties that cost you less than a couple $1,000.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, and the property doesn't have to be worth a ton either. Let's say you go to a place like Michigan and participate in some type of resale, or do something where you can get a property, you can get a deed for under $500, and maybe it's only worth 5 or 10 grand. Well, that would be a great property to seller finance, you know, to a neighbor or somebody like that, where they could start buying for the property, but they don't need to take a ton of money out of their pocket each month. Maybe the payment's only $100 a month or something like that, but that puts them in a position where they're able to buy it, gives you a residual income where you have money coming in each month, and really, you know, if you bought a property for $500 and let's say it was only worth, you know, it was worth 10 grand and you sold it to them for 5, well, you're going to still be making, you know, a residual income off that money, and just in a couple of months that property is going to pay for itself. And even if it's only $100 a month, you're still going to be receiving 100 or 150 or whatever that amount is every single month coming in. And if they don't, you just go through and redo the process, and it's just as easy as the first time.
Yeah, and you know, the types of prices that you can generally pay for tax deed properties, you know, they're going to be pretty low in that, you know, you're going to be able to create a tremendous amount of income without using a whole lot of money up front. Yeah, I think it's one of the best strategies for creating instant residual income. You know, start having that coming in on a regular basis. Let's talk about that second aspect here of property valuation, or transferability, which is something that you want to be on your mind when you are looking to get started somewhere, because you need to find out exactly what you need to do in order to transfer ownership on a property. You know, you need to know basically what. Not all counties are the same. You know, everybody has sometimes things that are a little bit different. There are certain concepts that are really similar across all states, but even then, you know, they're not. You know, just nobody has all the same terms. And when it comes to transferring, I think you know, some places are different than others. But for the most part, though, you can usually get properties transferred with the county. Fees. You want to watch out for fees with that. You know, at least when you're looking at counties you might potentially invest in. You know, a county that adds on a $200 per deed fee, that can get expensive after a while if you know, you buy very many properties from.
Yeah, it's just something you're going to want to look at, and we can see how the value transfers. How the transferability completely affects the value when we're looking at tax deeds. Because what we're doing with tax deeds is we're selling a property that we have full ownership, but it doesn't have a warranty deed. So because it doesn't have a warranty deed, that's going to affect the value. So even though we can transfer it, we can quit claim it to someone else, because it doesn't have a warranty deed, that's where we're going to be selling it as a wholesaler versus selling it for full market value. So that's something that you're going to look at with each one of the properties. There's going to be building lots of properties that aren't worth going through the quiet title process and getting a warranty deed. In fact, a lot of the lower dollar properties are probably going to be that way. But if you're looking at a property and you determine what the process is for going through quiet title, it's possible that it may be worth it because you're going to get that much higher. And so that's something to look at as we're looking at each one of these properties. Are we going to sell this with a quick claim deed? Are we going to go through the process to get a quiet title? And that's obviously going to affect the value. So if we're not, then that's no problem. Not a big deal. We do that all the time. But that means that we're going to sell it as a quick claim deed for a little bit less money.
Essentially wholesale it.
Yeah, because the transferability is essentially affecting that value.
Yeah. We actually have a really good question here from one of the members here. And basically what they're saying here is, so if someone was just starting out, would you suggest maybe doing one lien and one deed? And I think that's actually a really good suggestion. When you're first getting started out, you don't necessarily have to decide I'm only going to buy liens or I'm only going to buy deeds, because the reality is you'll learn a lot buying both, and they're different. When you go to buy them, they act completely differently, and so it's a good idea. You're going to learn more going through the process of buying than you could ever possibly make in terms of just making money on it. The experience is much more valuable there, and you don't have to go big. You can buy tiny little tax liens and deeds for under $50 or for under $100, and I think those are where you're going to learn perhaps the most, is because you're going through that process. And what's funny is that you probably won't even lose your money either. Going with really cheap liens. I used to think that that I would definitely mean I was going to lose my money if I bought something like that. But the first lien I bought was for like $67, and it was such a great learning tool. In buying that, and everything. Anytime I've ever gone through the process of buying, it's been a learning experience every time.
Yeah, I mean that's really going to be the case for any new type of state that you're investing into. And once you've kind of gone through that process, then it becomes a lot easier. You understand, what you need to do with that property, with that area, the systems that they use, and so it becomes a lot easier.
That's really one of the secret tricks to being successful with tax sales, is duplicating the process over again. Repeating sales. Going to once you buy something from a county one time, repeating it the second time through is much easier. Once you attend a tax sale, attending their next tax sale is easier to do, and so on. And if you, I think initially going through all the stuff for the first time is what's the most challenging thing to do. But once you've done that once, repeating the process is very easy. And so what a lot of investors do is, they may go through that process to learn an area, but they only learn one or two areas and they stick with them. And that way they're not wasting their time trying to figure things out. They pretty much have a system down, where they learn exactly how the area operates, and they figure out how to buy things there. Okay, so utility with the property, basically what we're talking about here is what a property can be used for, the potential uses for a property, which really is an important aspect when you're looking at properties, what they can potentially be used for. It's also the reason why something like a home sells for as much as it does and is so much more desirable maybe than a piece of junk land that you wouldn't be able to build on. So if let's say you were to take a small piece of land, it's not big enough to actually put something on. A problem with that piece of property is that it has a limited amount of utility. It's too small to put some kind of a building or a structure on, so the potential uses for it are pretty limited. And that will affect value. It's one of those things you have to consider is what uses the property might have.
Yeah, and one thing to look at in utility is also the zoning. For example, if it's zoned commercial, that may affect the price because usually commercial properties are going to be more valuable than residential. If it's zoned industrial, that's going to affect the price. If it's zoned agricultural or residential, all of those different things, and it also, as Shade mentioned, how the property can be used as well, could increase the value as well. For example, let's say we have a lot that's right there where it could be possibly zoned commercial or residential, or it's zoned residential, but it would be easy to get that property zoned commercial. Well, by zoning it commercial, you're going to bring more utility to it because now it can be zoned as a commercial property, which is going to increase the value of the property.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the zoning really is all about the utility. Number 4 is demand. And that's really about the number of people that want that type of property, how many people want it. I think like anything else, the more desirable something is, the more expensive it tends to get.
Yeah, definitely. And if, let's say that you list one of these properties on one of, like an auction website or something. You get 2 people that both want the property, and they are both, that's exactly what we see in auctions is usually when you have a property that was sold for higher than what's normal, it's usually because there's 2 people that are incredibly interested in this property and probably got emotionally involved in it, and that's the reason they're bidding up the price. And so, the demand, that can totally affect, if you list a property. In fact, sometimes we've had investors in the past that have listed properties for cheaper just so that they can get extra demand and get more people onto it, and then they actually have gotten higher offers because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really is something that works, and it's kind of funny because with auctions, they really do rely on an isolated bubble of demand. It's like you basically get 2 people, but it feeds on that demand. It gives the illusion that there's greater demand than there really is, but even with an auction, all it takes is 2. It only takes 2 people who want the same thing in order to increase that. But when you're looking at demand, part of the way that we think about and look at demand is when we're looking at other examples of properties that are for sale in the area, and we're trying to get an idea of how much property is listed in the area and what it's priced out at, because that gives us an idea. I mean, if we're looking at maybe buying stuff in an area, and one of the first things that we'll do is we'll go and look online, just on the internet, to try to find, basically type something out along the lines of, a lot in that area to try to find different listings that people might have. And if we see a ton of listings, then we're probably going to move on and find something else. Depending on how much competition there is. But if it seems like the market is just saturated with lots of properties like ours, then yeah, I think that might cause us to move somewhere else. But at the same time, the demand can also be such a positive thing. Once you find, let's say, the types of properties, building lots, you could say, in an area that's doing a lot of building, you're going to have properties that are in high demand, and it will help you get the highest price for it.
Yeah, and there's different things you can do as well when it comes to demand, as far as finding out how many properties are selling within that county per month. If you go to the National Association of Realtors, they may have that information. You could contact a local realtor. They should know it. And so they know, okay, well, in this particular county, we're selling 200 homes a month. And so based on how many homes are on the market, you can kind of get an idea. Also, one thing to look at is to see how many properties are selling. And that's going to help tell you your demand. So even if there's quite a few properties on the market, they're selling quickly, then that's usually a good sign.
Yeah, if you see properties and you go to look at them and they've been on the market for 6 months, 9 months, those are not usually good signs. You want properties to move more quickly, and of course it could have something to do with the property itself or with the price maybe that they're asking as to why it may not move. And don't let it scare you off just because what may not work because of price for other investors probably won't be a problem for you because you bought it for cheaper than anybody else can buy it. Some of the other factors that can affect your property value, but you'll hear us talk about a little bit less, things like the neighborhood. What is the neighborhood like, or some of the surrounding properties? We don't bring it up a lot because it's more of a concern that you get when you're buying property more as a consumer, I guess you could say. And that might sound crazy. You think, oh, a smart investor is always going to look, at the neighborhood and this and that. But the reality of it is, at the price points we're looking at for these properties, the neighborhood hardly becomes a factor. You know, it's kind of like if you're buying a Ferrari and saying, well, you know, the miles are kind of high, you know, but it's for sale for $500. It wouldn't really matter to you what exactly the story was if the miles were kind of high, or if he said that he, you know, there was a scratch somewhere on the car. If you were paying $100,000 for the car, then all of that stuff would be very relevant. But when you pay $500 for that same car, none of it's relevant, and that's because you're buying it at such a bargain. You're buying it with so much equity that those factors just don't have the ability to even change whether or not it's a good investment. It's a good investment just by virtue of the price.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's really only been a few neighborhoods where we've looked at the property and said, maybe not. And really that has to do with neighborhoods where things have completely run down. Maybe, for example, would be Detroit a couple of years ago, where there was certain blocks that were completely, you know, boarded up. And that's what's so nice about Google Earth, is you can go through and get an idea of the neighborhood. And if you see people living there and there's homes selling there, then it doesn't matter necessarily what neighborhood it is. Just like Shay talked about, it's all going to be in condition with the price. And so there's really only probably a handful of properties in the country where you're going to say, even though I'm getting it for nothing, you know, there's no value here because nobody's living on this street. And that's going to be very, very rare. In fact, you know, it's been a couple of years, and I just found some Pennsylvania properties we're looking at last week. They were like, you know, they're cheap, but you know, and so that's something that's going to be pretty rare, where you're going to turn away from a property because of the neighborhood.
Yeah, certainly,
and also it was, you know, the neighborhood plus the condition of the improvements plus the curb appeal plus the location plus the potential uses that made it, you know, non-desirable. It was really all of these things in combined with the neighborhood that said, okay, we're going to step away from that property.
Yeah, you know, in fact, the condition of the, I mean, if the property has improvements, then the condition of the improvements is the most important thing you can figure out, just because there can be so much variation in that. You know, it can be everything from the property being in great condition to it not even being there anymore. Okay, so you definitely want to know what the exact condition of the property is. Curb appeal, I would say, is, I'm sure there's an official explanation for it, but I kind of think of it as how desirable the property is or how desirable it appears, you know, from something like drive past.
Yeah, definitely. You know, is the yard upkept? Is it mowed? All of those things are going to affect the price, and it's maybe not something we're going to worry about when we're buying it, but when we're turning around and selling it, we're going to want to give as much curb appeal as we can.
Yeah. You know, property characteristics. You know, I was thinking about all these different characteristics, and we've really already kind of been talking about it anyway. But the question is, you know, what's the most desirable characteristic for selling property? And just hands down, price. And it's not just with real estate; it's with lots of other things where price is ultimately what determines, you know, your ability to sell it. But with real estate, especially, it's all about price. And the reason why is because people are not used to seeing real estate that sells for less than what like a market value on it. Okay, and the reason for that is because most people are not willing to lose money to sell a property. Well, when we buy from the county doesn't have that personal interest in the property. You know, aside from what's owed to them, which is maybe 5 or 10% of what the property's worth, they don't care what it sells for. And so we have that benefit going for us, which basically, you know, we have that power to buy the property at a much lower price, you know, than you're generally ever going to find it on the market. And that includes things like foreclosure sales. You know, years ago, before we did this, I used to think of bank foreclosures like some type of an investment strategy that was sophisticated and you know, and profitable. But in reality, I see it as the opposite of that now, because the opportunities with tax sales are so good. You know, and you know, when you've got a bank foreclosure, basically, the bank is going to sell it for everything they can get out of it, and any money they don't sell it for, they consider that money out of their pocket. And so you might get a slight discount with a bank foreclosure, but you know, again, it's going to be limited as to how much that discount can be. You know, you'd be lucky if you could get 10 or 15%, 20% maybe. You know, in some cases it might be less, but tax deeds are the only thing you're going to find where they have the capacity to sell for 10% of what they're worth, and that's just because they don't have somebody there to you know, to hit the brakes and say, whoa, you know, I don't want to sell it for this, because it's already past that. They've already lost the property for not paying the property taxes, and the county doesn't care what it sells for. They just care that it gets a new owner and somebody starts paying property taxes on it. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, as far as price is concerned, really, where I first learned about price was as a real estate agent. You know, I would go and list homes, and I could list a home, but if it was overpriced, I could spend money doing marketing and put it in ads and newspapers and all this kind of stuff. It didn't make any difference because the property was overpriced. Once that price came down to where it should be, then it didn't matter if how much marketing. We wouldn't have to do any marketing because it's priced to sell, and it's going to sell on its own. And so, you know, is wholesaling or looking at any of these questions, that's going to be our most concern as an investor, is what's the price we get it for, and then also in selling it, how, you know, what's the price we can sell it for to get it sold quickly. Yeah, you know, there are definitely price ranges where you wouldn't have to do anything to sell that property. Just by virtue of the price itself, it would sell itself, and that, you know, that can be pretty handy. Oh, we're going pretty long here. You know, as I mentioned before, I've got a checklist that a due diligence checklist that we should have ready here soon for members, and so on some of the stuff right here, like a lot of these questions, keep an eye out for that. In fact, you know, we may end up sending out an email here in the next couple of days with different materials and things for members to use. So we'll also, this is recorded, so you can get a replay of it later. We'll have that up on the website. But we'll get you a once I get this form complete, I think it'll be really handy. You know, we want to have one that everybody can use, so that we've got some uniformity. I think when we're doing it, people will make it a little easier. Yeah, definitely. So, but yeah, there are a lot of questions that you want to answer through the due diligence that you're doing, and we've got a lot of those listed here. You know, and more of them, you know, listed here. And some of these questions are questions that are just smart to ask at some point in the process, like whether or not neighbors might be interested in this property. This is the kind of property that neighbors might benefit from owning. And you can normally tell that by looking at the way that a property is divided up as to whether or not somebody would might directly benefit from it. But even then, the local buyers are still the most likely to buy. And so, you know, sometimes just a sale, I mean, a for sale sign in the yard makes a big impact with those people that see it every day. Other questions you can ask yourself are things like, when you look into the property, what was the last time it had a warranty deed? Has it ever had a warranty deed? You know, that can tell you something about it. You know, when you start looking for properties, what's the cheapest thing you can find in the area? And how does that compare to the properties you're looking at here? So many different things you could ask, and really you could probably keep on with even more questions. But these are all questions that are leading you in the right direction with properties that are going to help you be profitable with them. So, hey, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We'll let everybody go before this recording gets too big. Yeah, you guys have a great week, and look forward to talking to you again next week. If you have any questions about the coaching or the 3-day, just send us an email or fill out the contact form, and we can set something up and talk with you a little bit more about it. Yeah. In fact, yeah, we're happy to talk with people here. You know, we'll be getting all that stuff set up here over the next couple of days. So, yeah, hopefully we'll talk with more of you soon. So, thank you again for joining us tonight. We'll be here again next week. But if you need us in between then, hit us up anytime. Have a great week. See you later.